Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the GSE session 3AT given by David Fleischman. Automating JCL changes through the life cycle. If you have any questions, if you could put them in the chat, and at the end of the session, we'll go through any that we haven't dealt with during the session. And sorry, I had to, I will also allow you to unmute. I have so much power to unmute your mics at the end of the session so that you can, actually speak and ask questions that way. Just to remind you to give feedback at the end of the session. It's very useful for planning next year's GSE. So if everybody's okay, nobody's got any questions, I will pass you straight over to David.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Fleischman. I work for ASG Technologies. I've been with ASG for over 15 years now. I have a very vast background in JCL automation, as well as scheduling and every area of operations I've been in. From an operator to a systems programmer to a scheduling manager. Today we're going to show you ASG's ProJCL and how it can help with automating your JCL changes through the life cycle of that JCL environment, where you can move your JCL from one environment to another, and how our tool can actually help you automate those changes through that life cycle. So with that, so we're going to talk today about DevOps and the mainframe, JCL management changes, JCL management in the DevOps tool chain, our ASG's approach, and then a little demonstration. Setting the stage here is the moving JCL. When you're creating JCL and you're migrating it from your development systems to your QA systems to moving it into production, everybody has their own, uses different change management solutions. Our system actually works with all change management systems, and it could either be within the change management system itself, or it could actually be as a standalone process, or it could be a post process as well. So DevOps is an operations philosophy that focuses on the communication and coordination across teams, with the goal of providing better products within the solutions to our customers. The DevOps tool chain is made up of different automation software, as much as possible, development and operations, change management, where we interface with today, ProJCL interfaces with CompuWare's ISPW, Topaz. We also interface with IBM's IDZ for that Windows GUI environment instead of working on green screens. But our product also has uses RESTful APIs where we can connect to the different other products like Puppet, Chef, Jenkins, Jira, Kubernetes, GIT. So change management, we're always changing. Our workforce is constantly changing, especially with people that are reaching, our senior stages. We're used to green screen operations, and but the new people come into the IT today. don't like the green screens. They like the Windows environment. So our changing workforces, we have to adapt to these workforces. You also that within the new agile environments today with development, more and more development is happening in today's world at the spur of the moment, or we're constantly making updates to our programs and whatnot, and all that is causing changes within all the environments. So some of these challenges that we have within in this life cycle. How many mainframes are you got? Do you guys run today? Some shops have 1, 2. Some have 30, 40 mainframes with numerous numbers of LPARs that are running within those environments. JCL runs in dev, test, UAT, etc., production. Moving these from one LPAR to another, it's time consuming at times. With our solution, you don't have to move that JCL from environment to environment before you can validate it within that environment. Back in the day, basically what you had to do is you would develop your JCL in development. Then when I wanted to move it over into the test LPAR, I'd have to pick the JCL up, pick the procs up, pick any PARM members up, pick the programs up and everything, and move them over into that development and test environment. The other issue with moving JCL from environment to environment is usually the parameters need to be changed. So you're running with test JCL, now you have to, or development test JCL, then you have to move it to the test environment. Now it has to become tested JCL. You move it to your UAT or QA environment, and then it has to become QA. And then when you're ready to move it into production, you have to productionize the JCL and proc and any other PARM members that are associated with that proc and PARMs. And developers today are still working on that 3270 emulator, right? And it's first of all, when you're looking at those green screens, they get tiring. So moving the JCL from the development, test, QA, and production environments, you see that the JCL can move from environment to environment. You could have multiple development environments, multiple test environments, and when these the JCL and the procs and things are moving from these environments, if you're doing everything by hand and changing this JCL, again, if you're doing one JCL member or if you're doing 100 JCL members, it can get very time consuming and redundant and tedious, right? JCL is not the same when you're moving it from development to DevOps, or into your environment, production environments. You have the dataset naming conventions, the step naming conventions, job names. Your media could be in development. It could be on specific media types. When you move it into production, it could change. Data sets that are on GDGs. Did I create my index before I moved it over into those environments? Is my JCL structured? Do I have a common look to all my JCL? And then there's the scheduling constraints with your scheduling systems. Each scheduling system can have its own variable types that you're using in the JCL. Have those variables been validated? Did I create that variable in my JCL, in my scheduling system? All right. So talking about the structuring of your JCL, you see on the left-hand side, the JCL is not structured well. It can be, you see where the dataset names are. When you're moving into a different environment, then dataset names change. Our product also can, and this is a bad example, but our product can also standardize the JCL where it structures it and everything is aligned up within the JCL. So all your JCL can look exactly the same. When you get down to the DCB information, how do I want to see that DCB information? Do I want to see the DCB information in record format, LREC on block size in that order? Sometimes, programmers will code however they want to code, as well as they may not file your standards with job naming conventions and dataset naming conventions. All of this can be automated within our product. So you see here, we're moving prod. You have a production JCL member. You want to move it outside of prod. You're taking it out so you can work on it. So you check it out. You make sure that all the library names are changed. You reformat your JCL. You validate it. You're putting your test JCL together. You validate the JCL, then before you move into the UAT system, you have to, again, change all the library names, dataset names, job names, and whatnot, job classes. And you're through the change management cycle, you have to request approval every time you move it in from cycle to cycle. ASG's approach is today with our Eclipse plugin. Again, our Eclipse plugin, because Eclipse is free, so you can download Eclipse. And then our ProJCL plugin installs into Eclipse, and you can run Eclipse all by itself. If you have CompuWare's Topaz or IBM's IDZ, those are all based on the Eclipse firmware. So we plug into those as well. We just came out with our ProJCL release about 6 months ago with our new release that is Eclipse compliant. ProJCL also has a RESTful API. So it does connect into like Jenkins and Jira and the change management. So as long as those other third-party applications have that RESTful API interface, we can connect to that and send it information as well as receive information. So again, we work with Jenkins and Circle CI, and we work with our ASG scheduling software, where we validate our variables within the JCL. So context switching and how does it demonstrate to programmers? But basically, you don't touch your JCL. You try to not touch it as much as you can, but when you're running it through the system, and you're trying to validate JCL from your development to your test cycle, we have within ProJCL something called remote scanning, and that basically allows you to scan from, say, your test environment, but you want to scan it and you want to see if it's ready for the next environment. So is it ready to run in your QA environment? What ProJCL will do is it will actually port the JCL from your test environment. It will throw the scan over into your QA environment, and it not only does the JCL, but it will pick up the proc. It will pick up all PARM members that are associated that. So if you have JCL that's creating an ID, CAMs, delete and define, it brings all that over. It will then scan it in the QA environment and then return that scan back to your test environment. With it doing that, it also will validate, did I create my GDGs over in the QA environment? Do I have my security set up correctly? Does this job have the authority to create these data sets over in that QA environment. It also, ProJCL also gives you a centralized administration. I can have ProJCL running on 30 LPARs, and I can control them all through a primary system. I can create the runtime settings for those other environments, and I don't need to touch them over in those other environments. I can control them all from a central site. And any changes that I make to those members or runtime settings, ProJCL will sync to the master or to the primary, and the RTS files will maintain that synchronization between the different environments into your primary environment. It also isn't just a straight scanning. It doesn't just check syntax checking. It validates all of my JES runtime options. So did I create my data sets? Am I working with my DASI management system? If I'm creating SMS created data sets, do I have my SMS parameters set up correctly? Am I using the right classes and things? It simulates the run in JES, not just the syntax checks. It validates that this job is going to run in JES. So some of the highlights, we're efficient. We do have the DevOps interfaces. We have the remote scanning, centralized administration, the detailed simulations when it's doing scans, and we have many integrations where we integrate with all the third-party applications like SyncSort. We don't just validate the SyncSort JCL, we validate the SyncSort parameters. So did I code those SyncSort parameters correctly? My IDCAM parameters, did I code the IDCAM's parameters correctly? One of major credit card processing companies brought our product in. They interface with Topaz, and they wanted to automate their JCL moving from the development area, or actually from production. What they asked us is, we sometimes move JCL from production, and we have to take it out of production and put it into the test environment. And what we're doing today is we manually update and we add a step lib to every step that's in the JCL. Don't know why they add step libs, why they just add a job lib, but they step lib every job, every step in the JCL. And some of these jobs could have hundreds of steps. So they were putting a step lib in for every step. They also had a parm library that contained all their parm members, and they needed to change that parm member. They needed, or library, they needed to change all the step libs to be test step libs. And then they also had to change, if they were running like a DB2 program, they had a second set of overrides that they had to put in. And they were doing this all by hand. So they asked, could ProJCL automate that? Can it take production, when I'm moving it from production into my development environment, can it automate those changes? Can I change all my symbolics that have production symbolic names in them, and or symbolics in there for the production? Can I automate them to test? Well, yeah, you can. We did that for them. Then after we migrated them to development, then they said, okay, well, now we're done with it. Now we want to put it back into production with these changes. I need to rip out all those overrides. And again, ProJCL can do that. ProJCL allows you to do mass changes to JCL if you needed to. And it does it very easily. The language that ProJCL uses to create standards to standardize your JCL or to make changes in your JCLs, we use basic Rex, IBM Rex. But we have APIs to limit the amount of coding that you have to code within your JCL, within your Rex programs, rather, sorry. So it's, if I wanted to validate something on the job card, the job name, the first 3 positions of the job name. It's like 4 lines of code to validate that. So here's a look at what our Topaz looks like when you're running Topaz. Oh, we're missing slides. But this is, you would execute the scan from the Topaz workbench. You bring up your data sets, then there's a scan button. You scan, and the scan returns to the screen here. It also will validate the JCL in JES. It would show you all the error messages that would come out. If there's any error messages, then you can then validate the JCL and modify the JCL and fix your JCL, and then rescan the JCL. So with that, does anybody have any questions? Was there any questions in the chat?
There's nothing in the chat, no.
Okay. So one of the some issues that we encounter with when we see people trying to create standards, they'll standardize their production JCL, but then they forget to standardize their test JCL. We recommend, if you're running in the test environment, you know, in most shops, they do have some sort of standards with running how many, you're not allowed to use cylinders when you're running in development. You have to use blocks or tracks. But in production, I'm allowed to use cylinders, or I'm not allowed to use cylinders in production. I can use tracks. ProJCL can automate all of that, where it can convert them to from a cylinder to a track. It can modify the JCL to use the correct naming conventions in your job name and your dataset naming conventions. But it doesn't just validate that particular piece of JCL. It will validate the ID cams params that I create. Am I creating the correct dataset names in my ID cams? So, questions, anybody?
No, nothing in the chat.
Okay, well, I don't have any more slides to show. And so we're basically
done.
Yeah, we're done.
Okay, short but sweet. Okay, so if anybody does,
I know you muted yourself.
okay, so oh, here we go. Here's a question from Ewan Stewart. What are the primary advantages of ProJCL over other tools you have used? He's done that question to everyone, so I assume that there are people on the call that have used other products. So ProJCL is a product, but there are many other products available, as they say. So if anyone has any thoughts on that, you have been given the ability to unmute yourself, or you could put whatever answers you like to put into the group chat. And of course, David, you could answer that as well if you've seen other JCL tools.
I've seen many JCL tools.
In specific, ProJCL can do that the others cannot.
Well, one of the things that we do a little bit better than some of the others is that we interface with all scheduling products. So we interface with the CA Broadcom products, so CA7, JobTrack, CA Scheduler, TWS, OPC, Control M, ESP. We validate all of those variables within all those scheduling tools. We also, one of the things that we do is we can actually scan your entire schedule. So I actually worked at a company where we ran a daily scan against the entire schedule. And we probably had about 75,000 jobs that ran in our schedule. And we scanned 75,000 jobs every day. We would submit a batch job that would invoke the scheduler. It would do basically a forecast of the daily plan, and it would bring the schedule into the batch routine, and we would scan every member of the JCL of that schedule, and we would look for errors. We told the batch job, and you can tell ProJCL to only show errors. So you don't have to look through the entire piece of JCL to see where these errors are. And it kicked out any errors that you would see. And of course, sometimes you're going to get data set not founds and things like that because jobs that may be creating those data sets haven't run yet. One of the things that ProJCL does do is it knows and it simulates, again, how a job's going to run in JES. So when I'm scanning multiple members, and if those members are in runtime order, and ProJCL and a lot of these scheduling systems can put your forecast in job runtime order. When ProJCL scans these jobs, it knows when I scan job one creates a data set that's going to be fed into job two. If I scan jobs 1 and 2 together in the order that they're supposed to run in, I don't get a data set not found message because ProJCL is simulating what it's going to do in JES. So it's simulate the facts that it's going to create a data set out of job 1. That data set's going to reside on DASD somewhere, and then job 2 is going to run, and it's going to allow that job to pick that data set up. Well, ProJCL validates that when you run the jobs in runtime order. So it does a real runtime scan when you validate these JCLs in that runtime order. So that's one of the things that we do a little bit better than some of the competitors. Any questions?
Anyone else got any comments on that?
We also run again in all the life cycle management change management systems. If we sit in that change management process, we can fail a process from moving. So if there's a JCL error or an error of some type, don't move the JCL or proc from stage 1 to stage 2. We sit in that environment, and we're usually the first step of that environment where we scan the JCL and move that JCL. We don't just scan JCL though. Our product can actually scan just the PARM member. So an ID CAMS PARM member, I'm creating an ID CAMS PARM member. I just want to scan that PARM member. I don't want to attach JCL to it. I just want to make sure that I didn't create any syntax errors when I'm creating that PARM member. So I can scan a ID CAMS member, a sync sort member, an IEHB or BR14 member, an IEH program. We interface with all these products where we can just scan those PARM members. You can also just scan a proc. You don't have to have JCL wrapped around it. Now, of course, when you scan a proc, if you're using symbolics and you don't have a default symbolic table built inside your JCL, you're going to get symbolics not found. But if you have that default symbolic table, then at least you can make sure that you don't have any syntax errors within your proc. I know some of the products out there don't allow you to do procs and PARM library. members, that it's only for syntax checking the entire JCL components when they're together.
That seems to have exhausted the questions.
Yep.
Okay. I shall leave the session open. We can declare it closed, but I'll leave the session open if anyone wants to use this as a chat forum for a short period of time. Some groups have been finding that quite useful, a bit like gathering around the coffee machine to discuss maybe the session they've just been in or whatever. So I'll leave it open for about 5 minutes, but and you're sharing your screen, Dave.
Okay.
So that's it. Thank you very much for attending. If you have any further questions, you can always address them to Dave specifically. Also, please remember to make donations to the GSE charity, National Health Service. Just consider it buying a strip of raffle tickets, you know. Just pop a little donation in there, as you would have done had you been at the GSE face-to-face. So, but thank you all for coming. Thanks, David, for your time, and
You're welcome.
everybody else for the time that they've taken to attend.